Hey, welcome to Drowning in Yarn. I'm Caleb. This week, I want to talk to you about motivation in knitting, specifically how I stay motivated when I'm working on larger or more complex projects. This topic's been on my mind all week for two particular reasons. The first of which was that last week I was on Arena Shar's YouTube channel called Fiberchats, where she interviews really interesting people in the fiber community, and she asked me how I stay motivated whenever I'm knitting, because I do tend to knit a lot. And then the second reason is that I have gotten the privilege to preview a new yarn from Brooklyn Tweed called Tones that comes out later this month. I'm knitting the Aught sweater by Jared Flood using this new yarn, and it's sort of the perfect combination of yarn, timing, and pattern where I cannot put this sweater down. So I've just been powering through it without really having to force myself, and it's got me thinking, what's different between this project and those projects where I sort of struggle through, where they feel like an uphill climb? And on those projects, how do I stay motivated? What are the things that I do that keep me motivated to make that progress, that forward momentum, so that I can finish those projects and get that sense of completion? So as I've been thinking about these things, it sort of forced me to narrow down what I do to 4 really simple and sort of mind trick type things that keep me moving forward. So if you want to hear my 4 tips to stay motivated with your knitting when your knitting isn't really exciting you in that moment, then stick around. I just want to remind you while you're watching, if you're enjoying this video, then hit that little like button down below. And if you haven't already and you want to see more knitting and yarn related videos in the future, hit the subscribe button and the bell next to it to get notifications when I post new videos. Also, while you're watching, if you think of something that you do differently, go down to the comments section and let me know what you think. So I'll just start off by saying that I am a person who likes to knit every single day. I get a sense of satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment from just completing things, and that doesn't always mean completing an entire project, which leads me to my first tip. The first thing that I do is to break my project down into its component parts so that when I'm knitting it, I'm not just thinking of knitting the entire project as a whole, but I'm thinking about each part of that project as a milestone that I complete. And that can help drive you forward through the entire project. Obviously, this works better for larger and more complex projects, sort of like this sweater that I'm knitting right now. This is a colorwork yoke sweater, and I know from experience that there are various parts throughout that I can reach and know that at that point I've completed something, and it's sort of a self-contained section. For this project, I'm sort of thinking about the following 5 sections. I have from the cast on edge down to the bottom of the colorwork charts as the first section. Then from the bottom of the colorwork charts down to the portion where I separate for my sleeves as my second milestone. Then I have the body, and then I have sleeve 1 and sleeve 2. As I'm knitting this sweater, I don't think about this process as I'm just knitting this sweater. I think about it as sort of 5 sub-projects, and this really just allows me to keep feeling like I'm moving forward, I'm completing something, I'm on to the next part. I know this is really just a mental trick, but it's a trick that's worked for me and it might work for you. And it works really well, I think, when you have the proper context for what all the sort of portions of your project are. So if this project that you're working on is your first of that type, you might not have that context that you need to know what these different parts are. So I always suggest if you're starting something new that sort of scares you, start with a small version of that same thing. So if you want to knit your first sweater, find a sweater pattern like the flax pattern from Tin Can Knits that has sizes from the smallest baby on up to the largest adult, and knit a small size like a baby or a child size so that you can get through that project a lot quicker, know the exact construction, and then when you get to that larger size for yourself, you're just knitting the same thing over again and you know what all those parts are. So my next tip is to identify those portions of a pattern that make you feel like your progress has stalled and just find a different way to track them. Something that makes it clear that you're making progress. For me, this always happens when I have a repeat in a pattern. So for instance, on this Aught sweater, there's a raglan shaping portion just below the yoke where there's a 2-row repeat where on one row you have an increase and on the next row you're just knitting all the stitches flat. And you repeat these 2 rows a given number of times. When I get to a repeat like this, progress, I always just feel like my progress has stalled. Sometimes it's not obvious that your fabric is growing because you have so many stitches and it really isn't growing a lot. And then it also isn't obvious that you're moving forward in your pattern because you're just repeating the same 2 rows over and over again. So traditionally, I would just tick off in the pattern whenever I do a row, and I would just keep writing down tick marks till I've done the given number of repeats. But I found that that sort of doesn't show me that I'm making that progress that I want to be making. And a better way for me to track these kinds of repeats is to write down every row that I'm going to do. So if I'm doing 10 repeats, I'll write 1 through 20. And as I complete a row, I cross off the corresponding number on my pattern. And this makes it very concrete and clear that I'm chipping away at that work that I have left to do. Again, this is more of a mental trick, but it really works for me. So my third tip is related to that, and that is to use progress keepers. When you're doing those things such as the raglan shaping on a sweater, it takes a long time, and so your fabric won't physically grow super fast. So sometimes you'll sit down to knit, or you'll do a whole day's worth of knitting and then look at it and not notice any change. And that can be really disheartening. I found that is the quickest way to stop my motivation to keep going because I just feel like I'm gonna be knitting forever and nothing's gonna get done. So when this happens, I found that the best way to get past that is to prove to myself that I am making progress by using a progress keeper. All that entails is taking a stitch marker or something that's made specifically to be a progress keeper and inserting it into a stitch on that first row. When you sit down and start knitting for that day or that knitting session that you want to track, you really do just need anything that you can stick into the fabric and remove later. And this just gives you a physical representation of how much you've actually gotten done. So that might only be a few rows, but at least now you can see that those few rows added to your fabric versus just not really seeing it at all because it may not actually be that much because your project just may take a long time. Doing this just makes it so clear that you are making that progress, and seeing that progress really helps kickstart your motivation to keep going. So my last tip, and this is the one that I was talking to Arena about over on Fiberchats, and you probably have heard this from me before, and it's just to have sort of an easy, almost mindless project ready to go whenever you feel the stress of your other project, or you just feel like you need to put it down because it's just not serving you in that moment. Then you can pick up that easy project and just keep your hands moving until that motivation comes back. For me, this always tends to be kind of a vanilla sock, something that I don't have to think too hard about. I just find this so helpful to just keep making a little bit of forward momentum in my knitting. Knitting brings me such a sense of completion and a sense of satisfaction from just making something. So I find it really helpful to just keep working away at that, even when I don't feel like it. And that is so much simpler when you're working on that mindless project. So just always know what that project might be, have some yarn ready, or have that project already cast on and kind of going in the background. So when your other project stresses you out, when that first sweater feels just so big to you in that moment, set it down, pick up that other thing, work on it, and that motivation to keep making progress on that more complex and maybe more stressful project will come back, and you'll be ready to tackle that project as soon as it does. So those are the tips about staying motivated that sort of work for me, and I would love to hear what works for you. So head down to the comment section down below and let us know how you stay motivated whenever you're kind of feeling that stress of your project, or you're just not feeling like knitting. How do you keep moving forward and making that progress that you want to make on your projects? But if you've enjoyed this video, hit the little like button down below, and if you want to stick around for more knitting and yarn related videos that I post in the future, hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to head over to Fiberchats and check out my interview with Arena and all the other interviews that she's done. She interviews some really interesting people, so you'll want to check all that out. But until next time, I'm going to go keep making progress on my aught sweater. I hope you enjoy your knitting, and I will see you later.